His voice will be very familiar. His name definitely too. Errol Naidoo, of course, you know him as founder and CEO of the Family Policy Institute, a regular voice here on Impact Radio. He's been previously as well. We've had him on the show before, and always his voice comes up when important issues arise. And now, of course, it is such a time again. Errol, first, let me just say welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Willbert.
Okay, let's just talk about what is the current theme. I will touch on the broader work that the Family Policy Institute does a little bit later on, but let's get right into it. The state of disaster regulations. It seems like there might be more to this than what meets the eye.
Yes. So currently what government is doing is amending the National Health Act, which is ordinary legislation, to make the regulations or the provisions in the Disaster Management Act permanent. And that, of course, is very troubling because the Disaster Management Act is only activated and used in times of disaster, like a national health crisis, like the COVID-19 pandemic. And that comes to an end on the 16th of April. And the provisions afforded government in the Disaster Management Act are things like being able to lock down entire country economies, to institute curfews, to mandate vaccinations, to stop the sale of alcohol and cigarettes, and basically disrupt the lives of citizens because there is a state of disaster. And so it's extraordinary powers given to government in a state of disaster. Now what they are doing or planning is to amend the National Health Act and put all these provisions into that National Health Act to give them those extraordinary powers permanently, even when there is no state of disaster.
Yeah, this is very important because one of this is the changing of regulations. And if it gets hidden into a normal act, as you've mentioned, even when the state of disaster lifts, then those powers remain. What are some of the specifics around these regulations that we can see that government wants to implement that people need to look out for?
Well, the first thing about this amendment is that it is a grave threat to the constitutional rights and freedoms of every citizen in South Africa. And I can't overstate that. This is really, really bad legislation. So I'll repeat, this gives government extraordinary powers to however and whenever they feel like it. Government will be able to lock down the nation. Government will be able to, based on suspicion, have the police arrest citizens if there's a suspicion they have a medical condition, have them picked up and transported to a state-run isolation facility to be quarantined for however long government wants that to be. Government will have the power, if this amendment passes, to enforce medication on citizens. Whatever medication they deem necessary, you will have to take that, and they are not liable for the side effects of that medication or the pharmaceutical companies. Government will have the power to mandate vaccination. So if you want to travel out or travel anywhere or go into any place, government will say you have to be vaccinated and enforce that vaccination. Government will have the power to authorize surveillance. Just think about this. And because, Willbert, the regulation, this amendment is actually called, I'll read it out to you, the regulations relating to the surveillance and control of notifiable medical conditions. This means government can institute surveillance of citizens and monitoring of citizens based, again, on a mere suspicion, and override the privacy laws. So in ordinary circumstances, government will never be able to do this because of the constitutional rights that protect citizens in the Constitution. This will override that because it gives them the extraordinary powers to be able to surveillance, all those kind of things. So they can suspend, government would, if this amendment is passed, because it's a proposed amendment, If it is passed, government will be able to suspend and limit your constitutional rights and every single citizen. Suspend and limit that on the basis that they believe there is a national health crisis. And if anybody is suspected of being, somebody's coughing and somebody calls in and say this person is coughing all the time, well, that's a suspicion. So send the police, pick that person up and take you to an isolation facility. If you can't isolate in your own home, so you're staying with 5 other people in your home, the 4 others will have to move out of the home in order for you to isolate, to be there on your own, or you have to move out and find a place to isolate. And if you cannot do that, then government's going to take you to an isolation facility. Every citizen will have to submit themselves against their will. They have to submit themselves for a medical examination by the state, and then would have to take medication, whatever is suggested by the state, will have to take that. You will have no rights to refuse it. If you do, it's a criminal offense, and obviously you'll be arrested and incarcerated. So this is the powers that this amendment to the National Health Act gives government. And why are they doing this, Willbert? So you asked the question, why are they doing this? Because the National Health Act has to end on the 16th of April. And if you read, the news media, you will see that most countries are now canceling all the regulations. They're ending it. The UK started, they got rid of all their regulations. We just heard New Zealand now, sports stadiums are back to full capacity, and many, many nations, Denmark and Sweden, and everybody's moving in that direction, ending it, because they're moving into this new phase called living with the virus, living with this COVID virus, and managing it without putting these onerous regulations on people and harming the economy and all of that. And so in South Africa's case, we're not ending the regulations so that people can go back to normal life and learn to live with the virus and manage it properly. What the South African government wants to do is make it permanent. While every other country is ending it, South Africa wants to make it permanent. And what's the reason for that? This has got nothing to do with managing a national health crisis. This has got nothing to do with saving lives. This has got everything to do with control. And that is the most frightening thing about this legislation.
We do still live in a democracy, though, and we have a strong constitution, but it demands action from people for us to be able to have an effect in legislation, etc., which is the tough part, because people have to actually go out and do something. I'm guessing that's the same here. There's got to be a voice that's raised. You mentioned the word proposed legislation. There are due processes that has to be followed. So how do people now enforce their voices to try and stand against these proposed regulations?
Okay, before I tell you that, I have to mention that this isn't a passing of a bill in Parliament. This is just an amendment to legislation that already exists on our statute books. And because of that, this amendment is not going to Parliament. It's not going to be scrutinized by Parliament. It's not going to be debated. The only thing that is available is the public participation process. This means government is mandated by the Constitution to consult citizens of the country. And that's why there's this consultative process or public participation process, which ends on the 16th of April. So the only way that government is going to know that the people of South Africa do not agree with this is if people make submissions to Parliament, to the Department of Health. And if they don't do that, this thing is going to pass. So that's why this is so critical. So there is no parliamentary process here. Government can just pass this thing, but they must have the public participation process. So this becomes critical. And we only got 30 days in which to do this. So you've got to make a submission to the Department of Health. It goes to a Miss Sekani Furumele, the Director General of the Department of Health. And the email address is sekani.furumele@health.gov.za. And maybe you'll just spell that out for your listeners a little bit later. But what we've done at Family Policy Institute, we've set up a platform to make it easy for people to comment on this Amendment. And we've set up a portal called sapublicspeaks.co.za. So if you go to www.sapublicspeaks, no dot or anything, just one word, sapublicspeaks.co.za. If you click on the amendment to the National Health Act, or comment on the amendment, it will open up to a window. There's an explanation, a brief description of what this amendment is and what it would mean to you as an ordinary citizen. And it just gives you the most critical information. And then there's a window in which you can fill in your comments in your own words. So we don't form letters. If everybody sends the same kind of submission and put different names underneath, government receives that as one submission. Even if you have 100,000 names underneath it, it's still one point of view. So that's why we want people to comment in their own words. Just read the brief description of what the amendment is about, and then in the window, in your own words, it doesn't have to be a lengthy thing. It could be just one paragraph or two paragraphs. But it's important that you register as a citizen your opposition to this and say why. You can't just say, I disagree with this. You could oppose it. And I mean, the two most important things is that, firstly, this amendment is unnecessary because government has the Disaster Management Act at their disposal. So whenever there's a national health crisis, they can activate that state of disaster anytime they want to and manage the crisis. And then when the crisis ends and, you know, the state of disaster ends. But why do you government want to make this permanent? Even when there's no state of disaster, that's the frightening thing. So it's unnecessary because government has the Disaster Management Act at their disposal. They can use that at any time when there is a national health crisis. That's the first point. The second one is this is a grave threat to the constitutional freedoms, rights and freedoms of every citizen. It gives government extraordinary powers to control every aspect of citizens' life, ordinarily, anytime they want to, when they deem fit, when they, you know, if the infections increase to a certain rate and maybe most people not even going to hospital, government can declare this is a national health crisis. And therefore, it now gives them control over people. And I think every listener knows, watching the news media and everything, and what happened with the state capture inquiry and all the other investigations, our government is riddled with corruption, maladministration, incompetence. So many things are falling apart. The question is, do we as citizens want to give this kind of government extraordinary powers to control citizens when they cannot even run the country properly? When there's so much corruption and maladministration, do we want to give a government like this, these kind of powers? My personal opinion, it's national suicide. It must never, ever happen. And that's why we need millions of people to protect our democracy, our constitutional democracy, and the rights and freedoms of people. Everybody has to speak on this thing. So they can go to sapublicspeaks.co.za, an easy facility set up so people can make this easily, and they've got to speak. And again, I want to repeat, 1 or 2 paragraphs will suffice. But the Constitution gives every citizen of this country the right to speak into any kind of amendment or legislation, and government has to take it seriously, because we will have a record of this. If government passes this, we're going to go to court. The lawyers are going to take this to the Constitutional Court. They're going to challenge this. And we can, if they say, no, well, most people agreed with it, we'll have a record and say, you're lying. Here's the evidence. The people said no.
Absolutely. All right, Errol, I think the platform is definitely the easiest. It's sapublicspeaks.co.za for people to find out more. I'm on the portal myself now, and the email address is there as well. If people wanted to send a personalized email address, the Director General of the Department of Health email address also available on there, or you can just use the platform sapublicspeaks.co.za. Just quickly in closing, Errol, the Family Policy Institute does a broad range of work. Maybe just a reminder for people, a little bit of that, and maybe a link to where they can go find out more and sign up for your newsletters, etc.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go to familypolicyinstitute.com. That SA Public Speaks details is also on the website on the Take Action link. But if you go to www.familypolicyinstitute.com and click on subscribe, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter where I would keep people updated about what is happening with this thing. There's also the amendment to the electoral law that we're busy fighting to allow independent candidates to stand in the elections in 2024. There's the marriage. Government is trying to redefine marriage in the single marriage statute. There's a push to decriminalize prostitution, the sex industry. There's a whole lot happening by this government. And all of this influences is coming from overseas, from the United Nations agencies. It's not from South Africans. Citizens have to wake up to this. They can speak into all of these things. We can change these things, but we must be aware of it. And so I write about these things. I give links and information, when to write, all of those kind of things. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, you click subscribe, just fill in some brief information and submit. You'll get my weekly newsletter. It's just one page every week, but it is critical. It tells you what to pray about, encourages you to pray into certain things, and then to speak, to act when it is required, so that we, as Christians, can be salt and light in this nation as God has commanded us to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Family Policy Institute has been at the forefront of the battle to defend the family, advanced Christian values as well in Parliament, media, society, and broader. Errol, thanks for the great work that you do. We'll keep pointing people to the website and to that portal. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Willbert. Thanks for the opportunity.